Every city has an origin story.
Welcome to Quote the Queen City, where we peel back the pages of Cincinnati's history.
Quote the Queen City! Quote the Queen City! We crack the case!
In issue 4, we unmask a figure who feels like he was pulled straight out of an adventure novel. A soldier of fortune who fought for Frederick the Great, a hero of the American Revolution, and the man who kept his cool when everyone around him was losing theirs. He was a professional soldier, a Revolutionary War hero, and the man who transitioned Cincinnati from a rough, muddy military outpost to an actual functioning town.
Today, we unveil the origin story of David Ziegler. His tie to the Queen City? He was our first mayor, though back then they called him the President of the Council. He was the bridge between the lawless frontier and the city we love today.
This is Christy.
And this is her sidekick, Joe.
And this is
Quote the Queen City.
Let's set the stage. David Ziegler was born in Heidelberg, Germany on July 14, 1748. His father was an innkeeper, but David wasn't meant for a quiet life serving patrons. And honestly, it is not surprising to me at all that Cincinnati's first mayor was German.
Right.
It perfectly foreshadows the massive wave of German immigration that would define our city decades later, including many members of my own family.
Absolutely. Ziegler was a lifer in the military. Before he ever saw the Ohio River, he learned the art of war from the best. He served as a subordinate under Frederick the Great of Prussia. I mean, that's, pretty much the top of the era. Frederick revolutionized 18th century warfare with strict discipline and tactical brilliance. Ziegler absorbed all of that. He then fought in the Russo-Turkish War, seeing brutal combat in the Crimea. Before emigrating to America, he even received a badge of appreciation after serving under Empress Catherine II in the Russian army. He was a seasoned, combat-tested professional.
When he emigrated to Philadelphia in 1775, the American Revolution had just broken out. He didn't hesitate. He was actually the second person commissioned in the Continental Army for the war, joining the Pennsylvania Rifle Battalion.
And that Rifle Battalion distinction is crucial. Most soldiers back then used smooth-bore muskets, which were incredibly inaccurate. Ziegler's unit used Pennsylvania long rifles with grooved barrels. They were snipers. They could hit a British officer from 300 yards away, which completely disrupted traditional European military tactics.
He began as a lieutenant, and he was severely wounded in the Battle of Long Island in 1776, one of the earliest and most disastrous defeats for George Washington's army. But Ziegler didn't quit. Because of his Prussian background, he was exactly the kind of officer Baron von Steuben relied on to help drill the troops. So if you've ever seen one of those movies where the grizzled commander is screaming at a ragtag band of farmers, teaching them how to march and load their weapons and turn them into a real army, that was Ziegler.
After recovering from his wounds, he rejoined Washington's army for the grueling Philadelphia campaign. He saw intense, bloody action at Brandywine and Germantown. But the darkest moment was at Paoli.
Yes, the Paoli Massacre. In September 1777, British forces launched a surprise midnight attack on the American camp. To maintain the element of surprise, the British removed the flints from their muskets and attacked using only bayonets and swords. It was a chaotic, horrific night of hand-to-hand combat in the dark. Ziegler survived, but the brutality of that night stayed with the men of Pennsylvania forever.
I'll bet. Following that, he wintered with the army at the infamous camp at Valley Forge. Disease, starvation, and freezing temperatures killed roughly 2,000 soldiers that winter. Through it all, Ziegler was promoted to captain in December 1778 and served as brigade inspector of the Pennsylvania Brigade, ensuring discipline and hygiene were maintained in the camp.
He was an organizational genius for Washington. He was present at the ultimate surrender of British General Cornwallis at Yorktown in October 1781. Afterward, he went down to South Carolina to serve under General Anthony Wayne, a man whose name will pop up again in Ohio history. With the end of the war, Ziegler briefly retired from the Army on January 1st, 1783. After the war, Ziegler needed a civilian life. He opened a grocery store in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. He also became an original member of the Society of the Cincinnati.
Let's define that really quickly because it's literally where we get our name. The Society of the Cincinnati is a fraternal society founded in 1783 to commemorate the Revolutionary War. Membership was restricted to officers of the Continental Army and their eldest male descendants. It was named after Cincinnatus, the Roman hero who saved Rome and then gave up his power to return to his farm, just like George Washington did. Arthur St. Clair, the governor of the Northwest Territory, was a member, which is why he renamed the settlement of Losantiville to Cincinnati in 1790.
But the frontier was calling Ziegler back. In August 1784, he was commissioned a captain in the newly formed 1st American Regiment to serve on the Ohio Valley frontier. The new United States was pushing westward, and conflict with Native American tribes was inevitable. In 1789, President Washington promoted him to major.
That same year, love came calling. While stationed at Fort Harmar, near present-day Marietta, Ohio, Ziegler met and married Lucy Ann Sheffield. She was a native of Rhode Island who had journeyed out to the rugged frontier with her widowed mother. It was a tough life for a new bride. The Ohio Territory was a dense, dangerous wilderness.
Love in the afternoon. Do you remember that? Love American Style.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
Okay. So danger exploded in the 1790s during the Northwest Indian War. A confederacy of Native American tribes, primarily the Miami, Shawnee, and Delaware, were fighting fiercely to defend their lands north of the Ohio River. In 1790, Ziegler was part of the General Josiah Harmer's campaign against the Confederacy. It ended in a crushing defeat for the Americans, forcing a retreat back to Fort Washington, a massive wooden stockade that sat right where 3rd and Broadway in downtown Cincinnati is today.
This was a terrifying time for the frontier. In 1791, Governor Arthur St. Clair led another campaign. It resulted in the Battle of the Wabash, known as St. Clair's defeat. It remains the worst defeat of the United States military by Native Americans in history. Out of about 1,000 American soldiers, nearly 900 were killed or wounded.
It was an absolute slaughter. The survivors fled in terror back to Fort Washington. St. Clair had to head east to Philadelphia to explain this disaster to President Washington and Congress. He left one man behind to take command of the fort and protect the terrified settlers of Cincinnati. David Ziegler became the sentinel of the West.
While the rest of the settlement was in an absolute panic, expecting an attack at any moment, Ziegler was the calm in the storm. He fortified the defenses, reorganized the shattered troops, and maintained order.
But every superhero story needs a villain, and ours is General William Wilkinson. If you don't know Wilkinson, he was a piece of work. So historians later discovered that he was actually Agent 13, a paid spy for the Spanish Empire while wearing a U.S. Army uniform. Wilkinson was ambitious, treacherous, and incredibly jealous of Ziegler's command.
Wilkinson launched a political smear campaign. He falsely accused Ziegler of insubordination and drunkenness to ruin his reputation and steal his command.
Ziegler was a Prussian-trained honorable combat veteran. He had zero patience for political games, backstabbing, or defending his honor to a man he didn't respect. He essentially said, "I'm done with the army life." He resigned his commission in 1792. But here's the twist. He didn't leave Cincinnati. Despite the mud, the danger, and the politics, he had fallen in love with the place. Fast forward a decade. Cincinnati was officially incorporated as a village in 1802. We have to understand what the city looked like then. It wasn't brick buildings and paved streets. It was essentially a rough collection of log cabins, taverns, flatboat docks, and deep, impassable mud. Of course, there were taverns.
Yeah, that's you gotta have taverns.
And there still are.
Yeah, there's still probably some still from that time. Now, the population was only a few hundred people, but with incorporation, they finally had the power to govern themselves. They desperately needed a leader who could handle a tough frontier crowd. They held an election on April 3rd, 1802. David Ziegler won in a landslide, defeating two other candidates. He became the first president of the council, making him functionally our first mayor.
And he wasn't just a figurehead, he went to work instantly. Within his first few weeks, he passed the town's first actual laws. He established fire regulations requiring every household to own a leather fire bucket and making it illegal to build wooden chimneys.
Wooden chimney, my goodness. He also tackled the chaos in the streets. He made it illegal to run horses through the town. He set up the first taxes to clear stumps and pave the dirt roads, and he organized the city's first police force, known as the Night Watch. He took a chaotic, brawling military outpost and forced it to become a civilization.
He was so popular and effective that the next year he was unanimously reelected. But like Cincinnatus and George Washington, he knew when to step aside. After his second term, he declined a third, stating that it was time for new blood to lead the growing village.
But Ziegler never really stopped serving. When Ohio became a state in 1803, he took command of the Ohio militia. In 1807, Governor Thomas Kirker appointed him as the Adjutant General, the senior military officer for the entire state of Ohio. He was preparing the state's defenses just a few years before the War of 1812 would break out.
Before we get to his final days, we have to talk about who David Ziegler actually was as a person off the battlefield. Because the people of early Cincinnati didn't just elect a military resume, they elected a personality.
And he had a big one. Ziegler was famous around town for his absolute refusal to drop his military bearing.
That
Well-
sounds familiar.
That's right. Long after he retired from the army, he still marched through the muddy streets of Cincinnati with a stiff, perfect posture of a Prussian soldier. He was famously charismatic, known for his fiery temper, his quick wit, and a very thick German accent that he never lost. Man, that would be so cool.
He was also the guy who brought civilization to the frontier in the literal sense. His store at the corner of Front and Sycamore Streets wasn't just selling flour and gunpowder. He was the first merchant to bring actual luxury goods over the Appalachian Mountains. If you wanted fine imported European cloth, spices, or glass windows instead of greased paper for your cabin, you went to David Ziegler.
But his election as our first mayor wasn't just because he had the best store in town. It was a massive political rebellion.
Exactly. To understand early Ohio, you have to understand the political war happening at the time. You had the Federalists, led by men like Governor Arthur St. Clair, who believed in a strong elite central government, and you had the Democratic Republicans, led nationally by Thomas Jefferson, who were considered the party of the common people.
St. Clair and his Federalist friends basically ruled the Northwest Territory like a dictatorship, and the rugged frontier people of Cincinnati hated it. They wanted self-rule. David Ziegler was a fierce, outspoken Jeffersonian Republican.
So when Cincinnati finally incorporated in 1802 and got the right to hold its own elections, voting for Ziegler was a massive middle finger to the Federalist elites. He was the champion of the common pioneer, and when Thomas Jefferson became president, he rewarded Ziegler's loyalty by appointing him as the very first federal marshal of the Ohio District, responsible for enforcing federal law on the frontier.
Now, behind all this public success was a remarkably devoted marriage.
Woohoo!
Oh, David and Lucy Ann Ziegler were essentially frontier royalty, but there was a quiet sadness to their story. They never had biological children of their own.
But their home was famously warm and open. They were known for throwing incredible gatherings, and they eventually adopted and raised a niece as their own daughter. When David passed away, it shattered Lucy.
David Ziegler passed away on September 24th, 1811, at the age of 63. The entire town shut down. He was buried with full military honors, with a procession that included the militia, the city council, and hundreds of citizens.
But his death kicks off one of the strangest pieces of Cincinnati trivia. When Ziegler died, he was originally buried downtown at the First Presbyterian Church Cemetery on 4th Street.
But Cincinnati was growing too fast. The city needed the land, so they dug him up and moved him to the 12th Street burial ground.
Which we now know today as Washington Park, right in front of Music Hall.
Right, but then the city grew again, and so they decided to turn that burial ground into a park, so he was moved again. By this point, his widow Lucy had moved up to Dayton, Ohio, to be closer to family, and she eventually passed away in 1820. Decades later, to finally reunite them, Ziegler's remains were transported out of Cincinnati entirely.
So Cincinnati's very first mayor, the man who brought order to the Queen City, had to be moved 3 different times before he finally found peace beside his wife at Woodland Cemetery in Dayton.
But his legacy is still right here in the soil of the city he built. Today, If you visit Ziegler Park in Over the Rhine, you're swimming, playing basketball, and walking on ground named in honor of the man who started it all.
Let's enter the Hall of Justice to see how we remember our first commandant.
In 1775, he became the second person ever commissioned into the Continental Army for the Revolutionary War.
By 1778, George Washington's army promoted him to captain and named him brigade inspector to maintain order at Valley Forge.
In 1783, following the war, he became an original founding member of the prestigious Society of the Cincinnati.
When he moved to the frontier, President George Washington personally promoted him to major in the U.S. Army in 1789.
Following the absolute disaster of the St. Clair's defeat in 1791, he took command of Fort Washington, effectively earning the title Sentinel of the West.
Then came his civilian leadership. On April 3, 1802, he was elected as the first president of the council, making him Cincinnati's very first mayor.
In 1804, President Thomas Jefferson appointed him as the very first federal marshal of the Ohio District.
In 1807, Ohio Governor Thomas Kirker appointed him adjutant general, making him the highest-ranking military officer for the entire state of Ohio.
In 1811, he was buried with full military honors, with a massive procession that included the militia, the city council, and hundreds of citizens. Issue 4 is in the books: The First Mayor, The First Sentinel, and the Man Who Brought Order to the Frontier.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you in the next issue. Thanks for joining us for
Quote the Queen City!